Good evening, and welcome to The Sleepy Scientist. If you're here to unwind, to let your thoughts slow down like drifting clouds, you're in the right place. Tonight's journey drifts through one of nature's quietest, most patient forces, natural selection. It's the story of how life learns, over endless generations, to fit the world around it. From the shimmer of a fish scale to the curve of a bird's beak, every shape tells a tale of survival written slowly, line by time itself. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're watching from. It always amazes me to see listeners scattered across every corner of the planet, connected by curiosity and calm. And if you find this video soothing or interesting, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. If you're already part of this quiet little community, thank you. You help keep these stories alive. Just don't forget to tap the notification bell so you won't miss the next time we drift into something new together. I do hope this video isn't too interesting that it keeps you awake. But if it does, at least you might drift off a little wiser than before. So as the lights dim and the night settles in, here's a question to carry with you. Why does nature never stop experimenting? And how did those silent experiments create you? Natural selection is the quiet grammar of life, a rule so simple, yet so powerful, that it shapes every living thing you've ever seen. It's not guided by intention or design. It simply happens wherever life competes for limited space, food, or light. Imagine a field of flowers, each one slightly different from the next. Some bloom earlier, some later, some stretch a little taller. Those tiny differences, inherited and tested by circumstance, decide which traits will echo into the future. Variation is nature's raw material. Every mutation, every shuffle of DNA is a ticket in a vast lottery that never ends. Most tickets change nothing. A few change everything. Over time, the winning combinations, the ones that help a creature survive and reproduce, become more common generation after generation. That's evolution's quiet momentum. Darwin recognized it first in the finches of the Galapagos, where droughts and seeds rewrote the story of beak shapes in just a few years. But the principle reaches far beyond islands. It governs forests, coral reefs, and even the bacteria on your skin. Wherever life exists, nature is running tiny experiments, discarding what doesn't work and keeping what does. It's important to remember that selection isn't progress, and it isn't perfection. It doesn't move toward a goal, it only answers the moment. A moth darkens to match a polluted sky, and then lightens again when the air clears. Nature's edits are constant but never final. If mutation is the universe whispering possibilities, then selection is the quiet nod that decides which whispers become real. Over billions of years, those quiet nods have carved forests from chaos, coral from chemistry, and consciousness from coincidence. Tonight we'll follow that process from its simplest rules to its most elaborate results. How the need to survive became the artist behind every living form. Because the story of natural selection is, in the end, the story of life learning how to last. Every living thing on Earth is shaped by the same four ingredients: variation, inheritance, selection, and time. They're simple, almost invisible forces, yet together they form the quiet engine behind every feather, fin, and fingertip that has ever existed. Variation is where it all begins. No two individuals are exactly alike, not even identical twins once life has had time to leave its tiny fingerprints. Within any population, differences appear in colour, size, behaviour, and countless other traits. Some of these variations come from random mutations, subtle changes in DNA that can alter how a gene works. Others come from recombination, the shuffling of genetic material during reproduction, which mixes traits like a deck of cards. When a population is large and diverse, the possibilities multiply endlessly. Even the smallest difference, like a slightly longer beak or a paler shade of wing, can become the thread from which evolution weaves its tapestry. Imagine a field of grasshoppers under a bright summer sky. A few happen to be a little greener than the rest, better matching the blades of grass they hide in. When birds sweep over the meadow, those better camouflaged hoppers are a little more likely to survive. That tiny advantage isn't luck, it's the beginning of natural selection at work. Over generations, the greener genes become more common, until the entire population blends perfectly into the grass. The principle is so simple it almost hides itself. If some survive longer and reproduce more, their traits slowly take over. Inheritance gives those differences continuity. When a parent passes genes to its offspring, the instructions for its body and its survival pass along too. Each gene is a note in the song of life, carried forward through time. Acquired traits, however, like a scar or a learned skill, fade with the individual. What endures are the heritable instructions, stored in DNA. A giraffe that stretches for leaves doesn't pass on a longer neck by effort, but one born with a slightly longer vertebra might. Over vast spans of time, those inherited advantages accumulate, turning what was once a small variation into a defining feature of an entire species. Selection, the third ingredient, is not a conscious process. It has no goal, no plan, and no fairness. It simply happens wherever life reproduces imperfectly, and some versions leave more descendants than others. A cheetah that runs a fraction faster, a tree that shades its own seedlings, or a bacterium that resists a droplet of antibiotic. Each finds itself slightly more likely to continue its line. That small difference ripples outward, generation after generation, sculpting populations in silence. In every environment, the filters of selection differ. On a rocky shore, it may be strength against waves. In the desert, it might be water efficiency. In the forest, it could be camouflage or timing. Nature does not reward the best in any absolute sense, only what works best right now, in this particular place. That is why evolution has no direction, only adaptation. It does not march toward perfection, but meanders through possibility, pruning what fails and preserving what fits. Time, the final ingredient, is the great amplifier. The power of natural selection comes not from drama, but from repetition. A 1% edge in survival or reproduction may sound trivial, but over 1 million generations it transforms the world. Think of it like compound interest in a savings account. A small return, compounded endlessly, builds empires. Evolution does the same with genes. Each small edge builds upon the last until new species, ecosystems, and entire worlds emerge from the arithmetic of survival. Darwin grasped this power intuitively when he watched finches on the Galapagos Islands. Their beaks, slightly different from one island to the next, reflected the seeds and insects they relied upon. When drought struck, birds with beaks better suited for tougher seeds survived, and the next generation mirrored that advantage. What looked like design was, in truth, the slow arithmetic of difference and inheritance repeated under pressure. Natural selection does not work alone. Mutation introduces novelty, genetic drift introduces chance, and migration stirs the pot by bringing in new genes. But selection remains the quiet referee, deciding which variations persist. It is an editor, not an author, refining what randomness provides. To grasp its scale, picture the continents themselves. They drift invisibly, a few centimeters each year, shaping mountains and oceans so gradually that no human eye can see it happen. Evolution moves the same way. Each generation is a microscopic step, but when stretched across billions of years, those steps have turned single cells into forests and whales in the human mind. Evolution doesn't sprint, it drifts, like continents across deep time, When the day fades and the world settles into its evening hush, every rustle of grass and flicker of wings carries the signature of those four ingredients. Variation creates the raw material, inheritance carries it forward, selection sorts it, and time makes it endure. The meadow at dusk is not just full of life, it's full of survivors, each shaped by countless quiet advantages, tested and retested in nature's endless experiment. When Darwin spoke of the survival of the fittest, he didn't mean the strongest or the fastest. In biology, fitness has a much quieter meaning. It is the measure of how well an organism passes its genes into the next generation. Not how many miles it can run, or how heavy a rock it can lift, but how many descendants it leaves behind. Fitness is about persistence, not power. A small, unassuming organism that reproduces successfully can outshine the fiercest predator in nature's accounting books. Fitness is always relative. A polar bear is wonderfully fit in the Arctic, but disastrously unfit in the desert. A cactus thrives under the scorching sun, yet would wither in the rainforest. There is no universal champion of evolution, only specialists perfectly tuned to their stage. A trait that brings advantage in one environment might spell disaster in another. Evolution doesn't crown winners, it simply tallies survivors. The best way to imagine fitness is as compatibility with conditions. When the environment changes, the scoreboard resets. During an ice age, thick fur is a prize. In a warming climate, it becomes a burden. The lesson is humbling. Fitness isn't a trophy to keep, it's a temporary passport to survival. Every organism must balance competing priorities. There isn't enough energy, time, or safety to do everything perfectly. This is where life history strategies come in. The quiet art of deciding when to grow, when to reproduce, and when to risk it all. Some creatures live fast and gamble everything on a single season. Others live slowly, investing heavily in each offspring. Both strategies can succeed, but only in the right conditions. Consider the desert annual plant, which germinates after a rare rainfall. It has only a brief window to sprout, bloom, and scatter seeds before the soil dries again. Its fitness depends on speed and timing. It's the sprinter of the plant world. A single rainstorm can awaken thousands of seeds, each racing to reproduce before the heat returns. Their success isn't in longevity, but in numbers. Now look at a long-lived desert tree, like an acacia. It invests decades in growth before its first real burst of seeds. Its roots stretch deep, its wood thickens slowly, and it weathers countless dry years that would annihilate a smaller plant. Its fitness strategy is patience. Instead of gambling on one season, it endures hundreds, quietly storing energy until the next chance arrives. Both are perfectly fit for the desert, just on different timescales. The annual wins by being quick, the tree wins by being steadfast. Neither is objectively better, each is a masterpiece tuned to its clock. Across the living world, these trade-offs define the shape of survival. A mouse reproduces early and often, but lives briefly. An elephant takes years to mature and bears few young, but defends them fiercely. Fish scatter thousands of eggs to the current. Birds tend a handful of chicks in a nest. Evolution doesn't favour one approach over the other. It merely refines the balance between risk and reward. Every act of survival has a cost. Energy spent on growth cannot be spent on reproduction. Energy spent on bright feathers might attract mates, but also predators. For every advantage gained, something else must be sacrificed. These compromises are evolution's invisible contracts, written in the currency of energy and time. Even behaviours must obey this law. A songbird that sings all day may attract a mate faster, but it also attracts the hawk that hunts by ear. A frog that stays silent may survive longer, but without calling, it may never reproduce at all. Natural selection never grants free upgrades. It demands payment in another form. And sometimes fitness doesn't mean being the best at anything. It means being good enough at everything. An organism slightly less perfect in one area, but decent in many, may outcompete a specialist when the environment changes. The world favours flexibility more often than perfection. There's a quiet humour in that. If evolution had a gym, it wouldn't reward the heaviest lifter or the fastest runner. As Darwin might have smiled to say, nature's gym doesn't hand out trophies for bench presses. The winners are those who find balance between effort and rest, risk and caution, speed and patience. Humans often misunderstand this idea because our culture equates fitness with domination. But in biology, dominance can be fleeting. A top predator can vanish if its prey disappears. A plant species can spread across continents only to be undone by a single invasive fungus. What seems powerful today can be powerless tomorrow. True fitness isn't about control, it's about resilience. Even within a single species, fitness dances to a local rhythm. A penguin on one side of Antarctica may be adapted to warmer coastal waters, while another colony thrives among the colder shelves. Their genetics differ subtly, shaped by different challenges, yet both are equally fit where they stand. Evolution sculpts each population according to its story, not according to some universal ideal. The subtlety of fitness reveals a deeper truth. Life is less about conquest and more about persistence. The tiniest bacterium surviving inside a volcanic vent is every bit as successful, in evolutionary terms, as the mighty oak spreading its branches across a forest. Both have found a way to keep their line unbroken. Over the history of life, fitness has taken forms beyond imagination. Some creatures have evolved to thrive only in ice, others in boiling springs, and some in the acid pools of volcanoes. Fitness is not beauty, strength, or intelligence. It is the measure of harmony between an organism and its surroundings, a whisper of balance between what a body needs and what a world provides. In the end, fitness isn't a ladder or a race. It's a conversation between life and environment that never stops. Every generation renegotiates its place in that dialogue. Sometimes the answer is speed, sometimes patience, sometimes luck. So if evolution teaches one quiet lesson, it's this. Success isn't about dominance. It's about timing, balance, and chance. The most fit creatures aren't those who conquer the world, they're the ones who simply stay in tune with it. Every story of evolution begins with difference. Without variation, natural selection would have nothing to choose from, no traits to favour, no directions to drift, no surprises to uncover. The richness of life, from the colour of a butterfly's wings to the thickness of a polar bear's fur, depends entirely on the quiet chaos within DNA. At the smallest scale, variation begins with mutation, a simple change in the long code that makes every living thing unique. DNA is remarkably stable, but not perfect. Sometimes, when cells copy their genetic instructions, a letter is mistyped. One might be swapped for another, a piece may be inserted or lost, or a section may even repeat itself. These are called point mutations, insertions, deletions, or duplications. Most of these changes are harmless. Many go completely unnoticed, like tiny typos in a book so long that the story reads the same either way. A few, however, can be harmful, breaking vital instructions, and every once in a while a mutation produces a beneficial twist. A pigment that helps an animal hide better, an enzyme that works more efficiently, or a protein that resists disease. Those rare improvements are the sparks that selection fans into the patterns we call adaptation. Think of DNA as an immense library, where each book contains the story of a living thing. Mutations are the edits, some misspellings, some deletions, a few brilliant rewrites. Most are ignored, but occasionally one changes the plot just enough to make the next edition a little better suited to the world around it. Variation also flourishes through recombination, the genetic shuffle that happens during sexual reproduction. When two parents create offspring, their DNA doesn't blend smoothly like paint. It snaps and swaps segments like shuffled cards in a deck. Each child inherits a unique combination, a mosaic of ancestral genes never seen before. Recombination is why siblings can be so different despite sharing the same parents. It's why every new generation is a fresh experiment, a slightly altered version of what came before. This genetic shuffle keeps populations adaptable. It mixes traits that might never appear together otherwise. Resilience from one lineage, sharp senses from another, and perhaps a hidden disadvantage to be tested by time. Recombination makes evolution less like a straight line and more like a kaleidoscope, constantly rearranging patterns into new possibilities. Sometimes, entire sections of DNA are copied by accident, a process known as gene duplication. At first, this seems redundant, two copies doing the same job, but duplication is evolution's gift of creative freedom. One copy can keep performing its essential task, while the spare is free to mutate, drift, and experiment. Over thousands or millions of years, that spare gene might evolve a new function altogether. The ancient proteins that once built basic structures in early organisms have, through duplication and modification, become the foundation for complex tissues, new pigments, and even the molecules that allow sight and smell. In this way, duplication turns the genetic script into a layered story, where each chapter can be rewritten without erasing the earlier ones. It's the reason evolution sometimes repurposes old tools for new jobs. A fin becomes a limb, a jawbone becomes an ear, a reptile scale becomes a feather. Alongside these genetic changes, there are more subtle shifts known as epigenetic modifications, changes in how genes are expressed without altering the underlying code. They are the biological equivalent of adjusting the volume on a radio rather than rewriting the song. A gene might be turned up or down depending on diet, stress, or environment. These changes can sometimes persist for a generation or two, offering a kind of temporary flexibility that helps organisms adjust to short-term challenges. It's not evolution in the long-term sense, but it gives life a remarkable resilience, the ability to bend before it breaks. Even though most mutations and adjustments are minor, they accumulate in astonishing ways. In large populations, there are more individuals, and with more individuals come more mutations. That means more opportunities for novelty, more genetic experiments running simultaneously. A small population, by contrast, has fewer chances to stumble upon a beneficial change. It's like comparing a painter with 100 brushes to one with only a handful. Both can create art, but the larger palette allows for far more complexity. This is why species that number in the billions, such as bacteria or insects, evolve so quickly. Their populations hold an enormous reservoir of variation, ready to be tested the moment the environment shifts. When antibiotics appear, for example, a few bacteria may already carry a random mutation that grants resistance. Natural selection simply amplifies their success. The speed isn't magic, it's math, multiplied over countless replications. But not all variation is equal, and not all change is useful. Evolution doesn't predict what will work. It relies on endless trial and error. Every mutation, every shuffle, is a roll of the dice against the backdrop of time. Most fall flat, some change nothing, and a very few, unlock entirely new paths. What survives not because it was planned, but because it happened to fit. If mutation is the author, then natural selection is the editor. Mutation writes the drafts, billions of them, scattered through generations, while selection keeps only the publishable lines. Every living thing you see is the surviving text of that endless revision process, the refined manuscript of life's long story. The more we study genetics, the more it becomes clear that variation is not a flaw, but a feature. Life thrives on imperfection. Perfection would be stillness, and in stillness nothing evolves. The real strength of evolution is that it never stops making mistakes. Each error, each shuffle, and each duplicate gives the world another chance to innovate. All the colours in a coral reef, all the patterns in a butterfly's wings, and all the forms of life that fill the earth began as accidents, small molecular mishaps that survived by chance and usefulness. Every hue in a feather, every fold in a leaf, and every shade on a butterfly's wing began as a single letter change, a quiet microscopic mutation that time decided to keep. Natural selection doesn't shape life in a single way. It moulds, trims, and stretches the living world according to circumstance, sculpting traits into the forms that work best at the time. Yet those forms are not fixed. Environments shift, climates turn, predators arrive and vanish, and what was once an advantage can quietly become a liability. Nature edits constantly, but the pattern of its editing often falls into three broad rhythms: stabilizing, directional, and disruptive selection. Each one changes the curve of life's diversity in a distinct way, smoothing, pushing, or splitting it. Imagine a population as a curve on a graph, where most individuals cluster around an average value for some trait: height, color, or size. The tails of the curve represent the rarer extremes, the smallest, largest, lightest, or darkest. When conditions stay relatively steady, stabilizing selection takes the lead. This kind of selection trims the extremes and favors the middle ground, where balance lies. Human birth weight is a classic example. Babies born too small often struggle to survive the early days of life, while those born much larger can endanger both mother and child during birth. The healthiest outcome sits somewhere in between, and over generations natural selection maintains that balance. Similarly, many birds lay a moderate number of eggs. Too few, and the parents waste potential. Too many, and not all chicks can be fed. The sweet spot, just enough, but not too many, is preserved by stabilizing selection, generation after generation. If you could draw this process, the curve of variation would grow narrower over time, its peak rising toward the middle as the extremes are trimmed away. Nature, in these moments, acts like a careful sculptor, smoothing out rough edges, keeping things near the middle of the path where survival is safest. It is a quiet conservatism, a preference for the tried and true. But equilibrium never lasts forever. Sometimes conditions shift. Rainfall changes, temperatures rise, predators alter their tactics, and the once safe average no longer holds the advantage. This is where directional selection takes over. Instead of pruning both ends of the curve, nature now nudges the entire population toward one side. Darwin's finches offer a beautiful example of this in motion. During years of drought on the Galapagos Islands, only the hardest seeds remain. Birds with slightly larger, stronger beaks can crack them open, while those with smaller beaks struggle to feed. The survivors, and therefore the parents of the next generation, are the ones with the bigger beaks. Over a few breeding seasons, the average beak size in the population shifts upward. When wetter years return and softer seeds reappear, the trend can reverse, swinging back toward smaller beaks again. The curve on the graph, once centered neatly, now glides to the left or right. Directional selection doesn't destroy diversity, it simply slides it across the landscape of possibilities. It's nature's way of following the weather, adjusting, drifting, and testing new averages. Over time, this gentle push can produce striking transformations. Taller plants that outcompete their shorter neighbours for sunlight, darker moths that blend into soot-covered trees, or faster cheetahs that outrun their prey. Then there are times when being average is the worst option of all, when the environment rewards two opposite strategies but punishes those in between. We see the rare and fascinating pattern of disruptive selection. This mode of evolution favours both extremes at once, splitting the population into separate peaks and sowing the seeds of divergence. In the lakes of East Africa, some species of cichlid fish feed on the scales of other fish, a rather unusual dining habit. Some cichlids have mouths that curve slightly to the left, allowing them to bite prey on the right side. Others have mouths that curve right, attacking from the left. Fish with perfectly symmetrical mouths, however, are poor at either approach and rarely succeed. As a result, left-mouthed and right-mouthed individuals both thrive while the balanced middle disappears. The population divides into two specialized forms, a living, swimming graph of disruptive selection. You can imagine that same shape in many settings. In a patchy environment, one type of bird may thrive in dense forests and another on open grassland. But those that prefer the sparse border between the two struggle to find food or mates. In such worlds, extremes find niches while the middle ground becomes the hardest place to stand. What makes these forms of selection so compelling is that they aren't permanent states. The world never stays still long enough for equilibrium to last. A period of stability can be shattered by a drought, a new predator, or a sudden change in temperature. Directional selection can sweep through a population until it overshoots the new norm, at which point stabilizing forces take hold again. Even disruptive selection can give rise to fresh stability. Once the two extremes become distinct enough, they may settle into their own new averages or even split into separate species. In this way, selection acts not as a single sculptor, but as a team of shifting artists, each taking the chisel for a while before passing it on. Sometimes nature carves for symmetry, sometimes for change, sometimes for diversity. And because the environment itself is never constant, the art is never finished. A forest may hold all three patterns at once. Birds' clutch sizes might be stabilized by food availability. Leaf size might drift directionally with rising temperature, and beak shape might split into extremes to exploit different seeds. Evolution doesn't pick just one brushstroke, it paints in layers. If we could step back and watch the process unfold across deep time, the living world would seem to breathe. Populations expand and contract around their averages, slide in one direction or another, and occasionally break into separate lines altogether. It is a slow pulse of adaptation, the heartbeat of evolution itself. In all of these cases, the rule is the same. What counts as best depends entirely on context. No trait is universally good or bad. It is only good or bad for now. When the wind changes, the direction of selection changes with it. Natural selection likes balance, but only until balance stops working. It finds harmony, then rewrites the melody when the tune no longer fits the season. Nature likes balance until the world tilts again. In nature, survival often depends on being noticed at exactly the right moment, or not at all. The world is filled with eyes, hungry predators scanning for movement, cautious prey watching for danger. In this quiet contest, vision becomes a weapon, and the ability to control what others see or think they see can mean the difference between life and death. To survive, many creatures must learn one of nature's oldest tricks: to disappear or to pretend. Camouflage is evolution's art of invisibility. It doesn't erase an animal from existence, but it can make it blend so seamlessly into its surroundings that it becomes part of the background itself. On rocky outcrops in the American Southwest, the rock pocket mouse wears a coat the exact shade of the lava it lives on. Just a few miles away, its cousins in the sandy desert have fur the colour of pale dust. The difference between them lies in a handful of genetic changes, But those changes mean everything. A dark mouse on pale sand is an easy meal. A pale mouse on dark rock is practically an advertisement. Natural selection, patient and precise, tuned their colours to the canvas beneath their feet. The same story unfolded in the soot-stained skies of industrial England. Peppered moths, once pale and freckled, found themselves exposed against darkened trees during the rise of the Coal Age. A rare dark mutation suddenly offered safety, and in just a few decades dark moths came to dominate city populations. When the air finally cleared and the trees lightened again, pale moths quietly returned. It was a real-time illustration of selection's responsiveness, a species repainting itself to match the world's shifting palette. Not all camouflage works by simple colour matching. Some animals rely on disruptive patterns, designs that don't hide them completely, but instead confuse the viewer's perception. Zebras, for example, are almost impossible to miss in a field, yet their stripes create dazzling optical interference. When a herd moves together, the stripes blend into a flickering illusion of motion that makes it difficult for predators to focus on any single individual. The goal isn't invisibility, it's disorientation. Cuttlefish take this a step further. With specialized skin cells that change color and texture, they can shift from coral to sand to shadow in less than a second. Their camouflage is so intricate that even humans with high-definition cameras struggle to spot them. But what's most fascinating is that cuttlefish don't just copy their surroundings, they anticipate them. Their neural circuits analyze contrast and shape, then paint a living version of the environment across their skin. If art imitates life, then camouflage is life imitating its setting. Camouflage is the first half of the visual game. The other half is mimicry, not hiding from attention, but manipulating it. While camouflage says don't see me, mimicry says see me, but mistake me for something else. One of the simplest and most effective strategies is Batesian mimicry, named after the 19th century naturalist Henry Walter Bates. In this system, a harmless species evolves to resemble a harmful one. Hoverflies, for instance, wear the bright yellow and black stripes of wasps, but they can't sting at all. Birds and lizards, conditioned by painful encounters with real wasps, give them the same cautious respect. It's evolutionary bluffing, false advertising that works as long as predators keep believing the lie. But when many genuinely dangerous species converge on the same warning pattern, something different happens. This is Müllerian mimicry, where multiple harmful species share the same visual code for "leave me alone." Monarch butterflies and several other distasteful species use identical bright orange and black patterns to reinforce a lesson for predators: eat one, and you'll never forget it. The shared signal makes the warning more efficient, because each species contributes to teaching would-be attackers the same painful lesson. In this case, honesty pays, nature's equivalent of group advertising. Both types of mimicry rely not just on physical resemblance, but on the psychology of the observer. Evolution, in these cases, acts through the mind of the predator. What matters isn't just what an animal looks like, but what another creature perceives. A bird that mistakes a harmless fly for a wasp has been tricked, not by deceit in the moral sense, but by the limits of its own pattern recognition. Over time, the predator's learning shapes the mimic's design, and the mimic's success shapes the predator's caution. The two evolve together in an endless feedback loop of perception and deception. This dance between signal and response gives rise to some of the strangest visual adaptations on Earth. Some orchids, for instance, mimic the appearance and scent of female bees so perfectly that male bees attempt to mate with them, carrying pollen in the process. The flower gains fertilization, the bee gains nothing but confusion. Elsewhere, harmless snakes echo the vivid bands of venomous coral snakes, fooling even experienced predators into keeping their distance. Nature, it seems, rewards those who can act convincingly. Camouflage and mimicry extend far beyond wilderness. As cities expand, evolution follows. Urban creatures are learning to blend into concrete jungles as deftly as their forest ancestors did among trees. Moths now rest on pale walls instead of bark. Pigeons display subtler colour patterns to evade hawks, and lizards bask on rooftops whose temperatures differ from natural stone. Streetlights, pollution, and metal surfaces create new visual worlds, and animals that adjust fastest find new niches amid the architecture of humanity. Even in this artificial landscape, the same rule applies. To survive, you must either disappear or pretend to be something best avoided. It's not malice or magic, just perception sculpted by time. Each eye that scans a field or a wall is a force of selection, rewarding those whose patterns confuse or deter. If evolution had an artist, it would paint with the eyes of others. The predator's gaze, the prey's fear, the trickster's disguise. All are intertwined. Vision drives evolution to invent endless optical illusions, where survival depends on what one creature can make another believe. And yet, for all its cleverness, the goal remains simple: to make it through one more day. Whether hidden in sand, cloaked in soot, or dressed in warning stripes, life has found ways to reshape itself according to how it is seen. The forest at dusk, the reef at dawn, the alleyway at midnight, each is full of living actors, shifting roles between hunter and hunted, each trying to control the story told by sight. The quiet genius of evolution is that it doesn't just shape bodies, it shapes the illusions those bodies create. In the end, the difference between survival and discovery often comes down to the same thing: the art of being seen just enough, or not at all. In nature, competition never really ends. It doesn't declare winners or losers, it just keeps rewriting the rules. Every predator that learns to hunt more efficiently pushes its prey to hide or flee more cleverly. Every parasite that evolves a new trick for invading a host sparks a countermeasure in that host's immune system. It's a cycle as old as life itself, a quiet, endless chase, where progress is measured not by how far you move, but by how well you keep up. Biologists call this the Red Queen principle, after the character in Through the Looking Glass who tells Alice, "It takes all the running you can do to stay in the same place." In evolution, that phrase is not just whimsical, it's literal. Species must keep evolving simply to maintain their current position in the game. If a prey animal improves its speed, the predator must evolve faster reflexes just to avoid starvation. If a parasite finds a way past the immune system, the host must develop a new layer of defense to survive. Everyone is running, but the landscape itself keeps shifting underfoot. One of the clearest examples lies in the ongoing arms race between snakes and newts. In the forests of North America, rough-skinned newts produce a nerve toxin called tetrodotoxin, potent enough to kill a dozen predators with a single bite. Most animals learn to avoid them after one unlucky taste, but the common garter snake has evolved a remarkable resistance. Over generations, its nerve channels have become less sensitive to the toxin, allowing it to eat the deadly newt with minimal consequence. But evolution doesn't stop there. As snakes become more resistant, newts in turn evolve higher toxin levels. In some regions, their skin contains enough poison to kill several hundred people. The result isn't victory for either side, it's a costly stalemate, each pushing the other to new extremes. The same tension plays out on a microscopic battlefield inside our own bodies. Parasites and immune systems are locked in constant negotiation. A virus that mutates just enough to disguise itself from our antibodies can spread rapidly, until the immune system catches up with new defences. That success then pressures the virus to change again. This constant turnover is why some pathogens, like influenza, reinvent themselves year after year. It's also why our immune genes are among the most variable in the human genome, a reflection of millions of years of biological tug-of-war. In fact, the diversity of immune systems among individuals may be one of evolution's greatest insurance policies. No single immune design can stop every disease, but across an entire population, that variety makes extinction far less likely. Nature's solution to perpetual conflict is not perfection, but diversity. 1,000 small bets placed on different strategies, each one capable of meeting a different threat. The same logic governs the quiet struggle between plants and the herbivores that eat them. Because plants can't run away, they fight with chemistry. Many produce toxins, bitter compounds, or digestive inhibitors that turn their leaves into unappetizing meals. Milkweed, for instance, oozes a milky latex that clogs the mouths of insects. Yet a few specialized caterpillars have evolved ways to feed on it safely, even using the plant's own toxins for protection. Monarch butterfly larvae eat milkweed leaves and store the toxins in their bodies, making the adult butterflies poisonous to predators. It's a small evolutionary judo move, turning the plant's defense into the insect's armor. This same interplay repeats everywhere. Grasshoppers evolve stronger jaws to chew tougher grasses. The grasses respond by growing more silica crystals, which grind down those jaws. Some acacia trees grow thorns and recruit armies of ants to defend them, feeding the ants with nectar. The ants in return attack any animal that dares to nibble a leaf. It's not war in the human sense. No side wins outright, but rather a living equilibrium, a balance kept in motion by tension. These biological arms races are powerful, but they have limits. Every improvement costs something. The garter snake's toxin resistance slows its movements and metabolism. A plant that invests too heavily in defense may grow too slowly to compete for sunlight. Even within the immune system, a hyperactive defense can turn inward, attacking healthy cells. In evolution, there are no free upgrades. Every new advantage must be paid for with energy, time, or risk. It's the same quiet irony that underlies all adaptation. Success in one area can open vulnerabilities in another. The cheetah, built for speed, sacrifices endurance. The turtle's shell grants safety but limits agility. Nature tinkers constantly, but every new feature adds a price tag. As one evolutionary biologist once joked, every upgrade demands a Priscia battery. The endlessness of these chases might sound exhausting, but it's also the reason life never stagnates. Each advance by one species stirs change in another, pushing evolution to explore new designs. Predators refine their senses, prey develop sharper reflexes. Parasites evolve to exploit new hosts. Hosts diversify to stay ahead. The result is not a finish line, but a perpetual motion machine of adaptation, a system that sustains itself by never allowing rest. Even ecosystems built on apparent stability are shaped by these contests. Coral reefs, rainforests, and grasslands are full of species locked in microscale rivalries, each refining its tools against countless others. Over long periods, these interactions can even drive speciation, as populations adapt to different enemies or diets. The very diversity of life owes much to these hidden duels, played out over millions of years, and yet, despite the violence implied by the term arms race, there's something elegant in its constancy. The snake and the newt, the virus and the cell, the leaf and the caterpillar, each improves the other by forcing adaptation. The world evolves not through peace, but through persistence. The Red Queen's lesson is not despair, but motion. Life must keep moving simply to remain alive. If you could pause time and look closely, you'd see that this race has no finish, no podium, no trophies. The participants change, the strategies shift, but the rhythm stays the same. Each creature, each cell, each leaf and fang and feather is running quietly, just fast enough not to fall behind. If survival were the only goal of evolution, the world would look far less extravagant. There would be no peacock tails, no bird songs, no antlers branching like chandeliers. Life would be practical, streamlined, efficient, but dull. Yet nature seems to adore excess, decorating itself with colours, sounds and rituals that have little to do with surviving predators or finding food. The reason is sexual selection, evolution's flamboyant cousin, where the pressure to attract a mate can shape bodies and behaviours just as powerfully as the struggle to stay alive. Sexual selection begins where reproduction meets preference. In many species, one sex, often the males, competes for access, while the other, often the females, chooses. That competition can take the form of battle, endurance, or performance. Stags clash antlers in noisy duels, elephant seals roar across beaches, and male frogs fill the night with croaking contests to prove stamina. Each act burns energy and invites danger, yet it continues because those who succeed pass on not just their genes, but the very drive that pushed them to compete. Meanwhile, on the other side of the equation, mate choice takes on its own creative flair. Females in many species act as the world's most discerning art critics. They prefer the brightest plumage, the clearest song, the most symmetrical dance. Over time, these preferences sculpt the very features that appeal to them. Birds of paradise evolved dazzling feathers and choreographed displays that would put human performers to shame. Male songbirds refine tunes that can last for minutes, practicing them as faithfully as concert pianists. Even small fish, like guppies, evolve spots and colours purely because other guppies find them beautiful. This process is sometimes called aesthetic evolution, not beauty for utility, but beauty for its own sake. The female peafowl, over countless generations, has transformed the drab ancestor of modern peacocks into a living explosion of colour. The male's massive tail is heavy, awkward, and obvious to predators, yet it survives precisely because it is so burdensome. Only the healthiest males can afford to grow such extravagant feathers and still escape danger. Their survival while carrying such a handicap becomes proof of their quality. This idea, the handicap principle, explains why so many sexually selected traits seem impractical. A deer's antlers, for instance, take huge amounts of calcium and energy to grow each year. A weaker deer simply can't manage it. Similarly, a bird with bright feathers risks attracting predators, but that risk itself acts as a signal of vigour. It's as though the animal is announcing, "I'm so healthy I can afford this nonsense." In the logic of evolution, honesty often comes through extravagance. Sometimes, though, sexual selection goes beyond honesty into excess. When both the preference and the trait feed off each other, they can enter a spiral known as runaway selection. Suppose a few females in a bird population prefer slightly longer tails. Males with longer tails then father more offspring, and some of those offspring inherit both the long tail and the preference for it. Over generations, the two reinforce one another until tails grow absurdly long, serving no survival purpose at all. It's a self-perpetuating feedback loop driven by attraction rather than practicality. The peacock is perhaps the best-known example, but the animal kingdom is full of others. Male widow birds in Africa have tails nearly half their body length, purely for display. Some beetles grow horns so large they can barely fly. Male frigate birds inflate crimson throat pouches like balloons, and birds of paradise create shapes so surreal that early explorers thought they were mythical. A zoologist once quipped that peacocks are evolutionary art projects that somehow survived the critics, and he wasn't far wrong. In many cases, sexual selection leads to sexual dimorphism, the visible difference between males and females of the same species. Lions grow manes, while lionesses remain sleek hunters. Male cardinals glow in vivid red, while females keep muted tones for camouflage. Even behaviours diverge. Males may court, sing, or fight, while females evaluate and choose. These differences are not arbitrary. They reflect different investments in reproduction. Eggs, pregnancy, and parental care are costly, so females tend to be selective. Males, with less initial investment, often compete for the chance to pass on their genes. It's a biological economy of effort and risk. Humans, of course, are not immune to these forces. From hairstyles to song lyrics to athletic displays, much of what humans do for beauty or status can be traced back to ancient selection pressures. The impulse to impress, to be noticed, admired, chosen, is older than our species itself. Even the arts might owe part of their origin to the same deep instinct that drives a bird to sing before dawn. Yet sexual selection can also foster cooperation. In many species, elaborate courtship rituals help ensure compatibility, timing, and mutual investment. Albatross pairs perform synchronized dances before mating, and once bonded, they may remain faithful for decades. Their courtship isn't just about impressing, it's about aligning rhythms, testing whether two hearts can keep time together across a lifetime of long migrations. But every advantage in love carries a cost. The same feathers that attract mates can draw predators. The energy spent singing or displaying could have gone to foraging or defense. Evolution constantly negotiates between allure and survival, between flash and function. For every bird that wins a mate through spectacle, another falls victim to the same visibility. Beauty, in nature, is always paid for. Sexual selection reveals something profound about life. Survival alone isn't enough. Once a species has learned how to endure, it begins to explore how to attract. It's as though evolution, having mastered a function, decided to experiment with style. The peacock's tail, the nightingale's song, the dance of the cuttlefish, all are proof that life doesn't just adapt, it performs. Yet underneath the pageantry, the same rule applies as it does everywhere else in evolution. No trait is free of cost, and every choice reshapes the future. The forest, the savanna, and the ocean are full of silent contests of charm and colour, where attraction writes its own kind of logic. Nature's stage may glitter with showy feathers and elaborate songs, but behind every curtain call lies the same quiet truth. Beauty in nature is never free. At first glance, nature doesn't seem like the sort of place where kindness would thrive. Every documentary reminds us that the wild can be ruthless. Predators hunting prey, plants competing for light, animals fighting for mates. Yet, among all this struggle, cooperation keeps appearing. Ants sacrifice themselves for the colony. Bees work tirelessly for a queen they will never meet. Meerkats stand guard while others feed. Even humans instinctively help relatives and strangers alike. How can selfless behaviour evolve in a world driven by survival and reproduction? The answer lies in the quiet logic of kinship and reciprocity. The realization that helping others can, under the right conditions, help your own genes survive too. This idea took shape in the 1960s when evolutionary biologist William Hamilton proposed a simple yet powerful principle, now known as Hamilton's rule. Stripped of equations, it says this: an organism should help another if the benefit to that other, multiplied by how closely they are related, is greater than the cost to itself. In short, genes that encourage helping relatives can spread, because relatives share copies of the same genes. When a bee sacrifices itself to defend its hive, the act may seem tragic, but genetically it makes sense. The bee's own DNA is preserved in the sisters it protects. This kind of inclusive fitness expands the meaning of survival. It's not just about personal success, but about the success of the genetic network to which one belongs. a gene that leads to cooperation among kin can flourish, even if it causes some individuals to lose, as long as those losses help enough relatives to win. Nature, in this sense, doesn't care about the individual. It cares about the continuity of the code. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the eusocial insects, ants, bees, termites, and a few others, which represent the pinnacle of cooperation. In these societies, thousands or even millions of individuals act as one, each performing specialized tasks. Worker ants build and defend the nest, foraging tirelessly without ever reproducing themselves. All their effort funnels into supporting a single fertile queen whose eggs carry the colony's future. To human eyes, it might seem tragic to live and die without leaving personal offspring. But for the worker, the queen is not just a leader. She's an extension of their genetic self. Because of the peculiar genetics of many of these species, female workers are often more closely related to their sisters than they would be to their own potential offspring. Helping the queen produce more sisters can yet paradoxically spread their shared genes faster than having young of their own. The colony becomes a single organism made of many bodies, and the line between self and other begins to blur. The hive lives, even as its individuals come and go. Termites, which evolve sociality separately, show a similar pattern. Soldiers with massive jaws defend the nest and sometimes rupture their own bodies to block intruders. It is a sacrifice so complete that it almost feels human in its devotion. But again, evolution explains it neatly. The death of one protects thousands who share the same genetic foundation. Of course, cooperation isn't limited to family ties. Evolution also found ways to make reciprocity work among unrelated individuals. In some species, animals help others today with the expectation that the favour will be returned later, a kind of natural credit system. One famous example comes from vampire bats. On unlucky nights when a bat fails to find blood, it may beg from a neighbour who will regurgitate a small meal into its mouth. The favour isn't charity, it's trust. Studies have shown that bats are more likely to help those who have fed them in the past, and less likely to share with those who didn't return the favour. Over time, these tiny loans of life sustain entire colonies through uncertainty. It's a quiet, nightly pact, evolution written as etiquette. Humans have refined this instinct into something far more complex, but the roots are the same. Our ability to cooperate with strangers, to empathise and to build societies may have begun as an extension of these simpler systems. What began as kin-directed care, the desire to help those who share our blood, expanded into broader empathy through the evolution of social living. Once early humans learned to recognise faces, form alliances, and remember favours, cooperation became its own advantage. A tribe that worked together outcompeted those that didn't. Compassion, oddly enough, turned out to be a survival tool. Even in animals that can't plan or reason, cooperation sometimes emerges through group selection, a controversial but intriguing concept suggesting that behaviours benefiting the group can persist if cheaters are kept in check. Groups of cooperative individuals may outlast those full of selfish ones, especially when resources are limited or predators are many. In some bird species, for instance, sentinel individuals stand watch and call out warnings when danger approaches, even though calling draws attention to themselves. The group survival ensures that the genes promoting vigilance survive, even if some sentinels do not. What makes cooperation enduring is balance. Too much self-sacrifice and the individual disappears. Too much selfishness and the group collapses. Evolution constantly tunes this equilibrium. Cheaters, who take help but never give, are punished or excluded. In vampire bats, those who refuse to share are often denied aid when they themselves go hungry. In human societies, moral instincts and reputations perform the same policing function, ensuring that generosity doesn't vanish under the weight of exploitation. There's a certain poetry in how selfish genes, striving only to replicate, can produce acts that look like compassion. A mother protecting her offspring, a bird feeding its siblings, or even a soldier ant dying at the nest entrance. All are outcomes of the same logic. It isn't morality in the human sense, but it shows how natural selection can weave cooperation into the fabric of life. And though the mechanics are mathematical, the results feel almost emotional. Evolution discovered that helping others can be a path to survival, and that connection can be as powerful a force as competition. The human heart still carries echoes of those ancient equations. When people comfort each other, or risk their lives for family, or donate to strangers after a disaster, they are expressing instincts shaped long before language existed. In a world often described as red in tooth and claw, the persistence of cooperation reminds us that life's story is not just one of conflict, but of connection. The hive, the herd, and the human city are all testaments to the same principle. Survival is strongest when it is shared. In the end, evolution doesn't write morality, but it does write patterns that look remarkably like it. From the smallest gene to the largest colony, the mathematics of life allows room for kindness. Selfish genes, it turns out, can write generous behaviours. Evolution is often described as a process of selection, nature's careful choice of what works best. But alongside that quiet logic runs another, more unpredictable force: chance. The world isn't ruled entirely by strategy. Accidents, migrations, and random sampling all leave their fingerprints on life's diversity. Genes drift, populations mix, and traits shift across landscapes not because of design, but because of movement and luck. Evolution, for all its grandeur, is still partly a game of dice. One of the most subtle of these forces is genetic drift, the random change in the frequency of traits from one generation to the next. Unlike natural selection, drift has nothing to do with advantage or disadvantage. It's simply what happens when only a handful of individuals pass on their genes by chance. In a large population, such randomness tends to cancel out, but in a small one, it can steer evolution dramatically. Imagine a small colony of beetles living on an isolated patch of forest. By pure luck, a storm wipes out most of them, leaving behind only a few survivors. The ones that remain aren't necessarily stronger or smarter. They're just the ones who happen to be in the right place at the right moment. But now their genes, and their particular colour or pattern, will define the next generation. Over time, those random survivors can make their mark on the entire population. What began as an accident becomes the new normal. This effect is especially strong when populations are tiny, such as species living on islands or in fragmented habitats. A few random events, a drought, a disease, even a single tree falling, can drastically change which traits are passed on. Over thousands of generations, drift can create distinct populations even in the absence of selection. It's evolution's quieter companion, the reshuffling of the deck rather than the careful playing of the cards. A related process called the founder effect shows how big outcomes can grow from small beginnings. When a few individuals from a large population colonize a new place, they carry with them only a small fraction of the genetic variety of their parent group. These founders may not represent the original population perfectly, but they become the ancestors of everything that follows. Their quirks, once rare, can become defining features. Many island species bear this signature. The Galapagos finches that inspired Darwin's theory began as a few accidental migrants from South America. Their descendants spread to different islands, where drift and selection sculpted new beak shapes and behaviours. Each species carries echoes of that small founding flock. Similarly, the unique coat colours of island mammals, or the distinctive songs of isolated birds often trace back to the same story. A handful of pioneers whose limited genes became the blueprint for future generations. While drift and founder effects push populations apart, another force, gene flow, works in the opposite direction, blending them back together. Gene flow happens when individuals move between populations, bringing their genetic traits along for the ride. A migrating bird that joins a new flock, or pollen carried by the wind to another valley, can introduce fresh DNA to a population that has been isolated for centuries. This flow of genes acts like a current between pools, stirring them together. It can spread useful traits quickly, resistance to a parasite, for example, or better tolerance to heat, and prevent small populations from becoming too inbred. Yet it can also dilute local adaptations. A population finely tuned to its environment can lose its unique edge if too many outsiders arrive. In evolution, even mixing has consequences. Balance is everything. You can see the imprint of gene flow and drift together across landscapes, forming gentle gradients of change known as clines. In a cline, traits don't shift abruptly but gradually, mirroring geography or climate. Move from dark volcanic soil to pale desert sand, and the colour of animals' coats lightens with each mile. Travel from the equator toward the poles, and birds grow larger, their feathers denser. No invisible wall separates one form from another, just an ongoing blend of genetics and environment. A well-known example occurs in the deer mice of North America. In the forests, their fur is rich brown, blending with soil and leaf litter. But as the land stretches into open prairie, and then to pale dunes, the same species becomes sandy-coloured, a living gradient fading with the earth beneath it. Some of this is natural selection. Lighter coats hide better on sand, but part of the pattern comes from gene flow and chance. Mice move, breed, and share genes along the way, ensuring no sharp boundaries exist. Evolution paints in transitions, not borders. These invisible patterns remind us that randomness and movement are not enemies of order, they are part of it. Just as wind scatters seeds in unpredictable ways, drift and migration scatter genes, allowing evolution to explore new combinations. The result is a world that feels both dynamic and interconnected. No creature entirely isolated, no adaptation wholly deliberate. Even in humans, these processes shape our diversity. Every person alive carries the imprint of ancient migrations, population bottlenecks, and genetic drift. A small group of humans leaving Africa tens of thousands of years ago carried with them only a subset of the species' total genetic variation. From that modest sample, all modern populations beyond Africa descend, an echo of the founder effect on a continental scale. Our skin tones, eye shapes, and countless subtle traits are the products of drift, flow, and local adaptation layered together over millennia. It's tempting to think of evolution as a narrative of progress, the best solutions rising to the top, but randomness has always been part of the story. Sometimes it writes the opening line. Drift allows populations to explore paths that selection alone might never discover. Gene flow connects those paths, spreading what works and blending what doesn't. Over time, their interplay creates a patchwork of living forms that mirror the world's landscapes, diverse, fluid, and ever-changing. If we could zoom out and watch from above, we'd see the map of life shifting like weather. Populations splitting, merging, migrating, and fading. Each change small and almost invisible, yet together shaping the grand pattern of evolution. Even chance and wandering, when stretched across the canvas of deep time, leave patterns that time can read. If evolution is the art of change, then speciation is its masterpiece, the moment when one lineage becomes two, and the tree of life grows a new branch. Every species on Earth, from the smallest bacterium to the largest whale, traces its ancestry back to a series of such splits. Yet these moments rarely involve drama. There's no single day when one animal wakes up a new species. Instead, it happens quietly, through gradual divergence, as populations drift apart until they can no longer find their way back together. At the heart of this process lies reproductive isolation, the boundary that keeps species distinct. As long as the individuals can mate and produce fertile offspring, they remain members of the same species. When that ability fades, separation begins. Sometimes the barriers are physical, mountains, rivers, or oceans that prevent interbreeding. Other times they are biological or behavioral, incompatible courtship rituals, mismatched mating calls, or simply genetic differences that make offspring inviable. Biologists divide these boundaries into two broad categories. Prezygotic barriers prevent fertilization from happening in the first place, while postzygotic barriers occur afterward, producing hybrids that are weak or sterile. Mules, for example, are the offspring of a horse and a donkey, but they cannot reproduce themselves. The genes of their parents have diverged just enough to make further mixing impossible. The split is sealed, and two distinct species stand where once there was one. Most speciation begins with distance. Allopatric speciation, meaning different lands, is the most common path. Imagine a population of frogs living along a wide river. If that river deepens and widens over centuries, it might divide the population in two. On one bank, the frogs experience a cooler, shaded forest. On the other, a warmer, open wetland. Mutations accumulate, natural selection tunes each group to its environment, and genetic drift adds a sprinkle of randomness. Over thousands of generations, the two groups adapt to their separate worlds. If the river ever shrinks again, they might meet. But now they no longer recognize each other's calls. The reunion fails. They have become two species. Earth's history is full of these quiet fractures. Continental drift splits land masses. Glaciers rise and fall, isolating valleys. Volcanoes form new islands. Each event carves populations apart, giving evolution the raw space it needs to work in parallel. The Galapagos Islands, which sparked Darwin's imagination, are one of nature's clearest examples. A single ancestral bird, perhaps blown off course by a storm, found itself on an empty volcanic island. Generations later, its descendants spread across the archipelago, adapting to different seeds, insects, and flowers. The result was a chorus of distinct beak shapes and feeding habits, a living record of divergence in action. But not all speciation requires physical separation. In some cases, new species emerge side by side in the same landscape, a process known as sympatric speciation, meaning same land. It's rare but remarkable. Often it begins with a subtle behavioral or ecological divide. A population of fish in a single lake, for example, might start feeding at different depths. Those that stay near the surface evolve lighter colouring and different diets, while those that dwell deep develop larger eyes and slower metabolisms. If these preferences persist, they eventually reduce interbreeding. Even without walls or oceans, the population splits along invisible lines of habit and choice. Plants, too, are frequent participants in sympatric speciation, often through accidents in cell division. When chromosomes duplicate, creating individuals with extra sets, they can no longer mate with the original population. Entire new plant species have emerged this way in a single generation. Evolution's rare but spectacular leaps. Once new species exist, the pace of diversification can quicken dramatically. This burst of creativity is called adaptive radiation, and it occurs when a lineage encounters an abundance of open opportunities, new habitats, new food sources, or a world freshly emptied by extinction. It's the evolutionary equivalent of a city rebuilding after a storm. Space, resources, and time allow innovation to flourish. The Galapagos finches are a classic example, but similar stories have unfolded across the planet. In East Africa's Great Lakes, cichlid fish underwent one of the most explosive radiations known. From a few ancestral species, hundreds emerged, each adapted to a particular niche: algae scrapers, snail crushers, scale eaters, and even mouth brooders that protect eggs inside their jaws. Their diversity in colour and form rivals entire families of fish found elsewhere. Yet all of them share a common ancestor that once swam into a vast empty lake and found it brimming with possibility. Islands, whether surrounded by water or separated by mountains, often serve as natural laboratories for this process. Their isolation creates clear boundaries, and their limited resources impose strong selective pressures. Each island becomes a miniature world where evolution experiments at high speed. The Hawaiian archipelago, for instance, hosts hundreds of species of honey creeper birds, each with unique beaks and songs, all descended from a single ancestor. One sipped nectar with a curved bill, another cracked seeds with a thick one, a third probed bark for insects. Together they filled every ecological role available, painting the islands with a spectrum of adaptations. Adaptive radiations remind us that evolution is not only a story of survival, but also of creativity. When barriers arise, life finds new ways to persist. When barriers fall, it rushes to fill every opening. The same principles that separate species also drive them to explore new directions, to test new forms. It is a process both mathematical and artistic, as though nature herself were improvising, revising old melodies into entirely new songs. Even today we can watch these patterns unfolding in real time. Stickleback fish, once ocean dwellers, have repeatedly colonized freshwater lakes created by retreating glaciers. Each population evolves its own traits, armor plates shrinking, spines shortening, and within a few thousand years distinct species emerge. Evolution's tempo may be slow, but it never truly stops. From the tiniest island finch to the largest whale, every branch on the tree of life began with a split like this. A moment of separation, followed by divergence, followed by expansion. What began as a fork becomes a forest. Species are the blossoms of evolution, unique, temporary, and constantly renewed. If we could listen closely, the diversification of life would sound like harmony building on itself, each new species a chord, each radiation a symphony. Like chords from one note, new species unfold in harmony. Evolution has produced some astonishing designs. Wings that let creatures dance through the air, eyes that can focus on a star trillions of kilometers away, and lungs that can keep a whale underwater for hours. But for all its brilliance, nature's engineering is far from perfect. Every adaptation comes with trade-offs, compromises, and borrowed parts. Evolution is not an architect drawing blueprints from scratch. It's a tinkerer, modifying what already exists. The results can be beautiful, efficient, and occasionally just a little absurd. To understand why perfection never arrives, it helps to think in terms of energy budgets. Every organism has a limited amount of energy and time to spend. Growing thicker shells, brighter feathers, or faster muscles all cost resources. Energy used for one purpose can't be used for another. A bird that invests heavily in colourful plumage to attract a mate has less energy to spend on immune defence. A cheetah that sprints at breathtaking speed burns through reserves that could have been used for endurance. Evolution doesn't seek perfection, it settles for good enough. If a trait works well enough to ensure survival and reproduction, it stays, even if it could be better. Nature's imperfections are also a record of history's weight. Evolution can only work with what it has. Every species carries the marks of its ancestry, like geological layers in a fossil. Take your own wrist, for instance. Hidden beneath skin and tendons lies a subtle reminder of ancient fish. The bones that let your hand bend, rotate, and write are modified versions of fins, the same structures that once helped an ancestor paddle through shallow seas. Evolution didn't invent a new limb, it simply reshaped an old one. The same goes for the bones in your inner ear, which started their lives as parts of a reptile's jaw. Progress in biology means repurposing the past. Some of these ancestral leftovers are elegant, but others are downright clumsy. Consider the vertebrate eye. Its design allows for remarkable vision, yet the wiring is backward. Light must pass through layers of nerve tissue before hitting the photoreceptors that detect it. The result is a literal blind spot where the optic nerve exits the retina. Cephalopods, like octopuses, which evolved eyes independently, have a more efficient layout. Their photoreceptors face the light directly, with no blind spot at all. But we are stuck with our inherited blueprint. Our eyes work well enough, so evolution never had reason to flip them around. Or take the giraffe's recurrent laryngeal nerve, a famous symbol of evolutionary inefficiency. In fish, this nerve runs a short distance from the brain to the gills, but as necks evolved in terrestrial animals, the nerve took a detour, looping down around the aorta before returning upward to the larynx. In a giraffe, that path stretches several meters, from the brain, down the neck, around the chest, and back up again, all to reach a destination only a few centimeters away. It's as if nature laid the wiring before finalizing the design, and then refused to call the electrician back. Yet the nerve remains because it still functions. Evolution fixes problems by patching, not by rebuilding. These quirks reveal an important truth. Evolution doesn't erase the past. It refines it, reuses it, and occasionally paints over it. Biologists often call this historical contingency. The idea that what exists today is shaped not by what would be ideal, but by what was once possible. Another layer of constraint lies within the genes themselves. Many genes are pleiotropic, meaning they affect more than one trait at once. Changing one gene to improve a particular feature can inadvertently alter another in harmful ways. A mutation that increases bone strength might also reduce flexibility. A gene that enhances immune function could also increase inflammation. Evolution must navigate this tangled web carefully, balancing benefits and costs. The genome is less a set of independent switches and more a tightly interwoven network. Tug one thread, and the others shift with it. Living systems also show remarkable stability against small disturbances, a property known as canalization. Development often follows a well-worn path, so that minor genetic changes or environmental fluctuations don't completely derail an organism's form. Think of it like a ball rolling down a shallow groove. Small bumps may jostle it, but it still ends up at the same destination. This robustness is a gift. It prevents chaos from overtaking life, but it also limits how quickly certain traits can evolve. Canalization locks forms into stable patterns, making radical innovations slower and rarer than we might expect. Altogether, these constraints explain why the natural world, for all its wonder, is also full of oddities. The panda's thumb, for instance, is not a real finger, but an extended wrist bone repurposed for gripping bamboo. Birds breathe through lungs that move air in one direction, a system efficient for flight but costly to maintain. Human spines, inherited from four-legged ancestors, struggle with the vertical posture we've adopted, giving rise to back pain and hernias. Evolution solved one problem, freeing our hands, but introduced another. Every advantage casts a shadow. There's a quiet humour in all this imperfection. Nature, for all its power, is not a perfectionist. It's a pragmatist. It prototypes in production, testing changes on the fly. Some versions crash immediately, others survive just long enough to spawn a sequel. Over time, the rough edges get smoothed, but never fully polished. Evolution's motto might as well be, if it works, keep it. These trade-offs remind us that biology operates under constraints familiar to any engineer. There are budgets, deadlines, and limited materials. When a new trait appears, it must fit within the physics of bones, the chemistry of cells, and the metabolism that fuels them. The perfect organism doesn't exist, because perfection would demand infinite energy and zero compromise. Instead, life evolves toward workable solutions, sometimes elegant, sometimes awkward, but always functional enough to persist. The beauty of evolution lies in this tension between creativity and constraint. Every feature we see, from the sweep of a whale's fin to the curve of a human hand, carries both genius and limitation. Evolution sculpts possibilities, not ideals. It edits the workable, not the imaginary. In the end, the imperfections are what make life interesting. They are fossils of the process itself, the signatures of trial and error written in bone, nerve, and gene. For all its ingenuity, nature never starts from scratch. It renovates, rewires, and reuses. The result is a living museum of successful compromises, still under construction after nearly 4 billion years. Selection doesn't grant wishes or build dreams of perfection. It simply edits what already exists, one small change at a time, within the narrow rules of physics and heredity. Selection edits possibilities, not wishes. And somehow that has been enough to fill the planet with wonder. Evolution is often described as a dialogue between organisms and their environment, a steady back and forth, where life adapts to whatever conditions the world provides. But sometimes that dialogue turns into something more like a collaboration. Life doesn't simply endure what surrounds it, it interprets, adjusts, and even reshapes its world. From flexible bodies that change form depending on circumstance, to entire ecosystems built by the creatures that live within them, evolution isn't just reactive, it's creative. This creativity begins with plasticity, the ability of one genome to produce more than one outcome. A single set of genes can express itself in different ways depending on the environment, like a script that changes tone depending on who reads it. A dandelion grown in shade stretches tall with wide leaves, while one grown in sunlight stays compact and close to the ground. The DNA is identical, but the expression differs, a living form of adaptability. Plasticity allows organisms to fine-tune themselves without waiting for genetic evolution to catch up. Many amphibians can adjust their development based on temperature or food supply. Some tadpoles, for example, grow larger heads and stronger jaws when predators are nearby, a temporary armor against danger. Once the threat disappears, later generations revert to gentler forms. The species as a whole remains the same, but its individuals can shift to fit the moment. Even within a single plant, plasticity is easy to spot. Leaves that grow in the shade tend to be thinner and broader to capture more light, while those on the sunlit top of the same tree are thicker and smaller to avoid overheating. A forest canopy viewed from above is a gallery of adaptation painted leaf by leaf. Each one is a negotiation between genes and the conditions they meet. These differences come from developmental triggers, signals from the environment that switch certain genes on or off. Temperature, light, nutrients, and social cues all act as editors guiding how the genetic story is told. In insects, a few degrees of warmth can determine whether a caterpillar becomes a spring form or a summer form. In reptiles, temperature during incubation can decide the sex of the hatchling. Even humans show subtle plasticity. Nutrition and stress in early life can influence height, metabolism, and health decades later. The genome provides the possibilities, but the environment chooses which possibilities are realized. Plasticity isn't a replacement for evolution, it's a bridge. It helps species survive short-term challenges, giving them breathing room while genetic adaptation catches up. Over time, those temporary adjustments can even shape evolution itself. If an environmental shift persists, natural selection may favor individuals whose genes make flexible responses easier. In this way, plasticity and evolution weave together, one responding instantly, the other writing those responses into the permanent record. But organisms don't only adapt to their surroundings, they also change them. This is the concept of niche construction, the idea that life is not a passive passenger on Earth, but one of its primary architects. The world we see today is not a static backdrop for evolution. It is a mosaic of habitats built, altered, and maintained by living things. Consider the beaver, one of nature's great engineers. By felling trees and building dams, it transforms flowing rivers into still ponds. These ponds create wetlands, home to countless other species of birds, fish, and insects. In doing so, beavers alter not only their own chances of survival, but the evolutionary opportunities available to others. Generations of beavers reinforce this feedback, and over time, landscapes evolve as much as the creatures that inhabit them. The same principle applies in the ocean, where coral reefs act as living architects. Tiny coral polyps build calcium carbonate skeletons that accumulate over centuries, forming vast underwater cities. These structures provide shelter for millions of species, from the smallest shrimp to the largest predators. Without coral, much of marine diversity would vanish. The reef is both a home and a creation, a living environment built by generations of builders who will never see its full extent. Humans, of course, have taken niche construction to unprecedented levels. From the first fires lit to warm prehistoric caves, to cities that glitter across continents, we have reshaped our environment more drastically than any other species. We have altered rivers, soils, and even the atmosphere itself. Our actions feed back into evolution in ways both subtle and profound. Pigeons thrive in urban canyons, mosquitoes adapt to underground subway tunnels, and crops evolve under the pressures of our farming. We too are participants in this feedback loop, shapers and subjects at the same time. What makes niche construction fascinating is the reciprocal relationship it creates. When organisms modify their environment, they also modify the selection pressures acting on themselves. Beavers build dams, dams change water flow, and the new environment favours beavers with stronger teeth and better building instincts. Corals create reefs, and reefs reward corals that can resist storms. Even humans are reshaped by the environments we construct. Our diets, diseases, and social structures evolve in response to our own inventions. The loop tightens endlessly. Environment shapes organism, organism reshapes environment. This interplay adds a touch of poetry to evolution. It suggests that life is not merely reacting to the world, but co-authoring it. The air we breathe has been filtered by forests, the soil beneath us enriched by microbes and roots, the oceans structured by reefs and plankton. Even the global climate, once driven only by volcanoes and sunlight, now dances to rhythms partly set by living things. The planet itself is, in a sense, a biological artifact, the combined output of billions of years of niche construction. And yet, this creative power comes with limits and responsibilities. When environments change faster than organisms can adapt, as they do now under human influence, the feedback loop can become destructive. Forests vanish, coral reefs bleach, and the systems that once stabilized climate begin to unravel. Evolution's long conversation between life and environment becomes disrupted. but the very same capacity that caused the imbalance. The ability to reshape the world also gives us the means to restore it. In every era, life has rewritten its surroundings. Oxygen, once poisonous to early microbes, became the breath of animals. Plants turned bare rock into fertile ground. Beavers made ponds, corals made reefs, and humans made cities. The pattern remains the same. Life transforms its stage, then adapts to the play it is set in motion. If you look at Earth through this lens, it becomes less like a planet hosting life, and more like a planet built by it. The soil, the air, the colour of the seas, all of it bears life's fingerprints. Evolution's genius is not just in survival, but in construction. Sometimes, when you look across the living world, you notice a curious pattern. Creatures that have never met, that evolved on opposite sides of the planet, or even in entirely different eras, end up looking remarkably alike. A sleek predator slicing through the sea, a plant covered in spines that stores water in its tissues, a creature that sees the world through sound. None of these resemblances come from shared ancestry. They arise because nature keeps stumbling upon the same answers to the same questions. This phenomenon is convergent evolution, the art of arriving at similar solutions through entirely independent experiments. The idea may sound surprising, but it makes perfect sense once you remember that evolution is constrained by the same laws of physics and chemistry everywhere. The universe offers only so many efficient ways to move, sense, or survive. Life may be infinitely creative, but it still has to obey aerodynamics, hydrodynamics, and thermodynamics. When faced with the same challenges, different species often find themselves tracing the same elegant curves. One of the clearest examples swims through the world's oceans. Picture a shark, a dolphin, and an ichthyosaur, three sleek torpedo-shaped hunters. The shark is a fish, the dolphin a mammal, and the ichthyosaur an extinct reptile that ruled the seas during the age of dinosaurs. Their last common ancestor lived more than 300 million years ago, yet they all share the same streamlined silhouette. Narrow heads, smooth bodies, powerful tails. This isn't coincidence, it's physics. To move efficiently through water, a body must minimize drag. No matter how evolution starts, it ends up drawing similar shapes when the environment demands speed through liquid. Dolphins, of course, took a long detour to reach this design. Their ancestors were four-legged land mammals, probably resembling small deer, that returned to the sea about 50 million years ago. Over time, their limbs reshaped into flippers, their nostrils migrated to the top of the head to form blowholes, and their tails flattened into flukes. The same transformation occurred, in its own way, for ichthyosaurs long before. When physics keeps the rules simple, even distant lineages rhyme. Another striking case of convergence lies in the camera eye, the elegant organ that captures light and turns it into vision. Humans and other vertebrates have them, but so do octopuses, squids, and cuttlefish, whose ancestors diverged from ours more than 500 million years ago. Yet the resemblance is uncanny. Both lineages evolved lenses, irises, and retinas, arranged to focus light onto a sensitive surface. The same optical solution arose twice, independently, in creatures separated by 500 million years of evolution. And yet the two designs aren't identical. Vertebrate eyes, as we've seen before, have a small flaw. The wiring of the retina runs in front of the photoreceptors, creating a blind spot where the optic nerve exits the eye. Octopus eyes, built from scratch along a different path, avoided this problem. Their photoreceptors face the light directly, producing clear vision without a blind spot. Two very different engineers, one perfecting what the other had to patch. Evolution may repeat itself, but it never does so exactly. Sound too has its echoes of convergence. Echolocation, the ability to navigate and hunt using reflected sound waves has evolved at least twice, once in bats and once in toothed whales. The environments couldn't be more different, one filled with air, the other with water. Yet both groups rely on the same principle. Bats emit high-pitched calls that bounce off insects and surfaces, allowing them to see the world through echoes. Whales and dolphins send clicks through the ocean, reading the returning vibrations to track schools of fish or the outlines of reefs in the dark. What's especially remarkable is that these systems didn't just evolve similar behaviour, they evolved similar genes. Studies show that bats and whales share convergent changes in the same hearing-related genes, fine-tuning their inner ears to detect echoes. It's as if evolution, after a long search, kept pulling the same tool from its genetic toolbox. Different beginnings, same clever ending. On land, the deserts of the world tell another story of repetition. Across continents, unrelated plants have evolved nearly identical strategies to endure arid climates. The cacti of the Americas and the euphorbias of Africa both wear thick, water-storing stems and armour themselves with spines. Yet they belong to entirely different plant families, separated by more than 100 million years of evolution. The resemblance is so strong that early explorers often mistook African euphorbias for cacti. But it's simply the logic of the desert at work. When water is scarce, leaves become liabilities, evaporation becomes the enemy, and survival depends on turning oneself into a living reservoir. The outcome may look the same, but it's a rhyme, not a repetition. Convergence also shapes the unseen. Flight, for instance, has evolved independently at least 4 times, in insects, birds, bats and pterosaurs, each time following the same basic principles of lift and thrust. The materials differ, feathers, membranes or chitin, but the physics remains universal. The air does not care whether you are a moth or a sparrow. To stay aloft, you must play by its rules. There's a kind of humour in this repetition. For all its inventive power, evolution often ends up reinventing the same wheels, wings and eyes. As one biologist joked, evolution plagiarizes itself, legally. But this repetition is not laziness, it's efficiency. Natural selection works with what exists and what works. When it stumbles upon a particularly good solution, that design reappears wherever conditions echo it. Convergent evolution also highlights the boundaries of biological possibility. The laws of physics act like an editor, trimming the range of viable designs. There are only so many ways to see light, only so many shapes that slice cleanly through water, only so many architectures that allow flight. Evolution's imagination is infinite, but its materials and constraints are not. Given enough time and enough experiments, it is inevitable that different lineages will converge on the same forms, and yet there is something deeply poetic about this predictability. Across the sweep of time, life's diversity has emerged from wildly different starting points, yet its solutions often rhyme. A dolphin echoes an ancient reptile, a cactus mirrors a faraway cousin. An octopus eye peers through water much as a human eye gazes at the stars. These are not coincidences, they are verses of the same natural poem, written under the shared laws of physics and the shared hunger to survive. The next time you see 2 creatures that seem oddly alike, a shark and a dolphin, a cactus and a euphorbia, imagine the invisible thread that connects them. It's not ancestry but necessity, not imitation but inevitability. Evolution, for all its randomness, keeps finding the same harmonies in the great symphony of life. Different branches, same melody. Evolution is often imagined as a slow and ancient process, something that unfolds over eons, measured in fossils and forgotten eras. But look closely, and you'll see it happening right now, in the world we've built. The engines of change have not slowed. They've simply moved into new terrain. The modern age has become one of evolution's busiest laboratories. Every antibiotic, pesticide, skyscraper, and climate shift we create becomes another experiment, reshaping life at remarkable speed. Nowhere is this clearer than in the invisible world of microbes. Bacteria evolve at a pace that makes human generations look glacial. Their short lifespans and rapid reproduction mean that natural selection can run through thousands of generations in a single year. The result is antibiotic resistance. Evolution in fast forward. When an antibiotic is introduced, it kills most bacteria, but a few individuals might carry a random mutation that makes them slightly resistant. Those survivors multiply, passing on their advantage until the once powerful drug becomes useless. Within a few decades, or even a few years, resistance spreads worldwide. The story repeats with each new antibiotic we invent. Penicillin once seemed invincible when it was introduced in the 1940s. Today, resistant strains are common. The same has happened with tetracycline, streptomycin, and countless others. What began as a miracle of medicine has become a race between chemistry and evolution. The same principle applies to the natural world we try to control. Pesticides and herbicides were designed to protect crops, but they've created their own selective pressures. Insects and weeds exposed to these chemicals evolve resistance through the same logic as bacteria. Within a few growing seasons, populations that once perished under our sprays begin to thrive. Some mosquitoes now survive insecticides that used to wipe out entire populations. Certain weeds can shrug off herbicides by altering their leaf surfaces or producing enzymes that break the chemicals down. In trying to hold nature still, we've taught it to move faster. This isn't evolution in theory, it's visible in the field, in the soil, and in hospitals. Each time we apply a drug or a chemical, we act as a selective force. Our efforts to eliminate pests, parasites, or pathogens rarely end them. Instead, we sculpt them into new, tougher versions of themselves. Evolution, it turns out, takes our challenges personally. But it's not only the small and invisible that are evolving around us. The wild creatures living alongside humanity are changing too. Cities, with their concrete canyons, artificial lights, and constant noise, are among the newest and most extreme habitats on Earth. Yet countless species have adapted to thrive there. Urban wildlife has become a textbook in rapid evolution. City pigeons, for instance, have evolved darker plumage in polluted environments. The extra melanin helps them bind and shed heavy metals, protecting them from toxins that would poison other birds. Mosquitoes living in the London underground have diverged so much from their above-ground relatives that they can no longer interbreed, a new species born from subway tunnels. Even certain plants now time their flowering to match streetlight cycles instead of sunlight. Evolution, it seems, follows traffic patterns as easily as tides. In some cases, urban adaptations go beyond survival and reshape behaviour itself. Songbirds living in noisy cities sing at higher pitches to be heard over the roar of engines. Raccoons have developed greater problem-solving abilities to navigate human garbage bins and doors. Lizards in Florida cities have evolved longer limbs and stickier toes to climb smooth walls and glass. The result is a kind of parallel world, a wild evolution running silently alongside our own routines. The climate too is forcing species to change in real time. As seasons shift and temperatures climb, the timing of life, migration, breeding, flowering, is being rewritten. Many birds now migrate earlier in the year or return sooner from their wintering grounds. Some plants bloom weeks before they used to, following the warming of the soil rather than the length of daylight. These shifts are subtle at first, but they ripple through entire ecosystems. When flowers open too early, pollinators may not yet be active. When insects hatch sooner, their predators must catch up or starve. Evolution races to retune these relationships before the system falls out of harmony. Even humans are still evolving. though in ways quieter than our inventions. The ability to digest lactose into adulthood spread rapidly after the rise of dairy farming only a few thousand years ago, a blink in evolutionary time. Genes that influence immunity, metabolism, and even altitude tolerance continue to change in response to modern environments. We often imagine ourselves outside nature, but we are deeply inside its processes, still subject to its laws. There's a quiet irony in all of this. For centuries, people thought of evolution as a relic of deep time, something finished long ago. But in truth, we have become one of its most powerful forces. Every antibiotic prescription, every sprayed field, every concrete skyline adds a new pressure, a new test. The modern world hums with selective forces so constant we barely notice them. We are not observers of evolution, we are participants, and yet our influence comes with unintended consequences. The organisms we push to adapt do not always do so in ways that benefit us. Drug-resistant bacteria make hospitals dangerous again. Superweeds invade farmland. Insects adapt faster than our chemistry can follow. The more we control, the more nature learns our rules and rewrites them. We accelerate what we barely understand. Still, there's wonder in watching evolution unfold before our eyes. It reveals the resilience of life, its refusal to stagnate, its inventiveness under pressure. From microbes to megacities, the story remains the same: variation, selection, survival. The details change, but the pattern endures. Evolution has never needed our permission to proceed. It doesn't slow for cities, pause for civilization, or sleep when lights stay on through the night. It merely shifts its stage. From oceans and forests to hospitals, farms, and urban streets, the boundaries of nature are rarely sharp. Mountains fade into foothills, forests blend into grasslands, and rivers dissolve into deltas. Life thrives in these in-between spaces, the edges where two worlds meet and overlap. In ecology, these transitions are called ecotones, and they are some of the most dynamic places on Earth. Edges are where diversity gathers, where species mingle, and where new possibilities begin to form. Evolution, it turns out, often whispers its next idea from the borders. An ecotone is neither one thing nor the other. It might be the shaded margin of a forest giving way to open meadow, or the muddy meeting place between fresh water and sea. In these transition zones, plants and animals from both habitats coexist, competing and cooperating in complex ways. The result is often greater richness, more species, more variation, more experiments in survival. The forest edge, for example, hosts the birds of the woods and the insects of the meadow together in a strip no wider than a path. In the gentle chaos of that overlap, evolution finds new combinations to test. These physical boundaries set the stage for biological ones, the edges between species themselves. Where two closely related species meet, something fascinating often happens. They may not stay separate. Instead, they form hybrid zones, regions where individuals from each side interbreed, exchanging genes across a delicate border. Hybrid zones are like natural laboratories for evolution. They show that species are not rigid categories, but living populations in flux, still negotiating their boundaries. Sometimes hybrids are rare and unfit, quickly filtered out by selection. Other times they thrive, blending traits from both parents into something new. The tension between fusion and separation, between merging and remaining distinct, drives much of the evolutionary drama at these edges. Consider the warblers of North America. Across the northern forests, several species meet and overlap, producing hybrid offspring where their ranges touch. Some of these hybrids are weaker, unable to find mates in either parent population. In other regions, though, the boundaries blur until the species seem to fuse, forming a ring of variation that loops around a continent. Each local population can interbreed with its neighbour, but by the time the circle closes, the two ends are too different to produce fertile young. It's a living demonstration that speciation is not a single event, but a gradient stretched through space and time. Toads tell a similar story. In Europe, the common toad and the natterjack toad share a boundary that meanders across the continent. In the overlapping zone, hybrids appear with mixed calls, half between a croak and a trill, often confusing both parents' mating systems. These hybrids rarely persist far from the border. The line holds, but it wavers, always in motion, pushed back and forth by climate, geography, and chance. In other cases, hybridization becomes a creative force. Butterflies in the genus Heliconius, known for their vivid warning colours, frequently share habitats in the tropics. Their overlapping ranges have produced hybrid individuals with new colour patterns, living mosaics of their parent species. Some of these hybrids even become stable populations, introducing new wing designs into the evolutionary palette. To predators, these mixed signals can blur the line between mimicry and confusion. To evolution, they are opportunities, new experiments in visibility and survival. The same principle applies to plants, perhaps even more dramatically. Many plant species can hybridize freely, and some of the world's most successful crops, including wheat and cotton, owe their origins to such unions. Hybridization can create polyploid species, where the offspring inherit double sets of chromosomes, effectively forming new species in a single leap. While animals often guard their boundaries tightly, plants seem far more willing to cross lines and see what happens next. These blurred borders challenge our human tendency to categorize. We like to draw boxes around species, to imagine them as distinct and static. But nature doesn't draw lines, it shades. Every population exists on a continuum, its edges diffused by migration, mutation, and chance. In hybrid zones, we see the process of speciation not as an event completed long ago, but as a living conversation, sometimes peaceful, sometimes full of debate. Hybridization also highlights the balance between order and chaos in evolution. Too much gene exchange and distinct species collapse into one. Too little, and the flow of variation stops, limiting innovation. The sweet spot lies somewhere in between, where small amounts of mixing introduce novelty without erasing identity. In that tension, evolution keeps its creative edge. Even the physical landscapes that host hybrid zones can shape their outcomes. A mountain range, a river, or a shifting climate can stretch or compress the boundaries between species. When glaciers retreat or deserts expand, populations meet that have been apart for thousands of years. The result is often a burst of hybridization, an evolutionary handshake after a long separation. Some lineages fuse back together, others spark entirely new species. The process is slow but visible in the fossil record and in the genomes of living organisms. In the modern world, human activity has created new hybrid zones of its own. Urban expansion, deforestation, and climate change move species ranges, forcing previously isolated populations into contact. Coyotes and wolves, for instance, now hybridize across North America, forming adaptable coy wolves that thrive in suburbs and farmlands. Even our crops and domesticated animals crossbreed with wild relatives, spreading genes across landscapes once divided. Evolution continues to mix its paints, even on our canvases. What makes these edges so intriguing is their unpredictability. Some hybrid zones persist for millennia without resolution, held in equilibrium by the balance between selection and gene flow. Others dissolve or give rise to entirely new species. They are not mistakes in evolution's process, but essential parts of it. Dynamic frontiers where possibilities multiply. Standing at the edge of a forest, you can feel this principle in miniature. The sunlight filters differently, the air hums with overlapping sounds. Insects from the meadow, birds from the trees, each voice part of a broader symphony. Evolution listens closely here, fine-tuning its instruments. It's in these places, where categories blur and boundaries breathe, that the next chapters of life are often written. Every border in nature is both a barrier and a bridge. Hybrid zones remind us that life is not carved into fixed compartments, but flows, connects, and experiments. The world's edges are not endings. They are beginnings in disguise. For most of Earth's history, evolution unfolded without witnesses. Mutation and selection worked in silence, shaping the colours of feathers, the curve of leaves, the grace of fins, unseen and unguided. But then came a creature capable not only of noticing these patterns, but of bending them to its will. Humans learned to choose, and in doing so, we join the evolutionary story not just as participants, but as authors. This deliberate shaping of life, artificial selection, began tens of thousands of years ago, long before the word evolution was ever spoken. It started with a simple realization. Some plants tasted better, some animals behaved more gently, and some seeds yielded more grain than others. By keeping and breeding those that pleased us, our ancestors discovered how to direct nature's quiet logic toward human ends. The difference between natural and artificial selection is not in the mechanism, but in the motive. Nature selects through survival, humans select through preference. Both, however, rewrite the code of life. One of the earliest and most profound experiments was the domestication of wolves into dogs. No single event marked the moment of transformation. It was a slow companionship, born of mutual curiosity and convenience. Wolves that were less fearful or aggressive lingered near human camps, scavenging scraps and alerting people to danger. Humans, in turn, tolerated and eventually nurtured these animals, favouring those with calmer temperaments. Over generations, the descendants of those friendlier wolves began to change. Ears softened, tails curled, coats varied. What had once been a predator became a partner. Today, every breed of dog, from the Mastiff to the Chihuahua, traces its lineage back to that ancient unspoken alliance between two species learning to trust. Plants too bent under human choice. Wild grasses in Mesoamerica once bore tiny hard seeds that scattered at the slightest touch. Early farmers selected the rare plants that held onto their seeds longer, making harvesting easier. Over thousands of years, those choices turned a scraggly weed called teosinte into modern corn. Ears swollen with kernels, each one a genetic monument to patient cultivation. The same process unfolded elsewhere. Wheat in the Fertile Crescent, rice in Asia, and maize, potatoes, and beans across the Americas. Every harvest carried within it the story of selection, each field a silent collaboration between evolution and human desire. Even the diversity of vegetables we eat today hides an astonishing truth. Broccoli, kale, cabbage, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts all come from the same wild ancestor, a humble plant known as wild mustard. By selecting for different traits, flower buds, leaves, stems, farmers sculpted this single species into a buffet of forms. Nature provided the potential, human taste provided the direction. The variety of food that fills our markets and tables is, in essence, a gallery of evolution guided by human hands. Artificial selection is powerful precisely because it uses the same machinery as natural selection, but compresses time through intention. A breeder choosing the best sheep for wool is doing what the environment does to wild populations, deciding which individuals will pass on their traits. But unlike nature, which selects for survival, we select for beauty, taste, strength, or temperament. The principle is identical: inheritance, variation, and choice. The outcome, however, can be startlingly different. Yet our guiding hand comes with unintended consequences. When we narrow our focus to a few desirable traits, we often reduce genetic diversity, the very ingredient that fuels future adaptation. Purebred animals, bred for appearance or pedigree, sometimes inherit harmful recessive genes that weaken health or fertility. Crops grown from uniform strains can fall victim to disease that sweeps through entire fields at once. In 1845, the Irish potato famine revealed how dependence on a single clone variety could devastate millions. Evolution favours variation for a reason. It is nature's insurance policy against uncertainty. Even in animals, selective breeding sometimes leads to trade-offs that echo the compromises of natural evolution. The bulldog's flattened face, bred for cuteness, can cause lifelong breathing difficulties. Dairy cattle optimized for milk production require constant human care. Our selections, well-intentioned or not, rewrite evolution's equations faster than feedback can correct them. In the modern age, our ability to shape life has leapt from breeding pens and crop fields to the molecular scale. Genetic engineering allows us to insert, remove, or edit genes directly, skipping the slow dance of selection altogether. We can give rice the ability to produce vitamin A, engineer bacteria to clean oil spills, or alter mosquitoes so they cannot carry malaria. Each step pushes us further into evolution's workshop, holding the tools once reserved for time itself. The power of these tools is immense, and with power comes complexity. A gene introduced to solve one problem can ripple through ecosystems in unpredictable ways. A drought-resistant crop might spread beyond its intended range. A modified insect might interact with wild populations in unforeseen patterns. Unlike the ancient farmers who guided change slowly, we now make edits in decades, or even days. The rhythm of evolution has accelerated under our watch, and we are still learning how to keep pace with its consequences. Yet there's also beauty in this responsibility. Every act of selection, from choosing the sweetest apple to designing a new vaccine, reflects the same ancient curiosity that first drew humans to the campfire and the wolf's glowing eyes beyond it. We are both the product and the practitioner of evolution, shaped by it, shaping it in return. The process has come full circle. Artificial selection reminds us that control is not the same as understanding. We can influence evolution's direction, but we can never truly step outside its rules. We are limited by the same trade-offs, subject to the same constraints. Our species selects, but nature still decides what lasts. Perhaps that's the quiet lesson of all this tinkering. Evolution doesn't belong to any one force. It's a dialogue between randomness and intention, between genes and environment, between what exists and what might be possible. Every garden, kennel, and laboratory is an echo of that dialogue. When we breed, cultivate, or edit, we participate in an ongoing story older than civilization. To select is to imagine a future, and then to make it real. But the act of selection carries a quiet weight. Each choice alters the inheritance of tomorrow, whether through breeding, engineering, or conservation. We are not just witnesses to evolution anymore, we are part of its mechanism. To select is to shape the future, quietly or deliberately,